There are some who say the era of the epic musical had passed, but as somebody who has seen virtually every Broadway show in the past 12 years, I can say that there is now a very epic musical on Broadway, Doctor Zhivago. And these are some of the creative and talented people who have brought it to us. Let me introduce them all briefly. To my immediate right, two-time Tony Award winner, the director, Des McAnuff. To his right, Tony nominee and two-time Grammy winner, the composer, Lucy Simon. West End veteran making his Broadway debut as the title character, Tam Mutu. And finally, Broadway veteran and the woman who is desired by not one, not two, but three men in this musical, Kelli Barrett.
And certainly more around the world.
You can Google them all. Musicals take a long time to put together. It would be easy to say, why Dr. Zhivago right now? But right now was probably a while ago that it started. Who first had the idea to take this 1950s novel, which was probably more known to many people from its 1965 movie adaptation? Who first said, let's make this a musical?
Yeah, all eyes point to me. I wanted to do it because after I'd done The Secret Garden, I felt I wanted to do something that I could be as in love with as I was with The Secret Garden. And I always loved the Russian music that I grew up with a father who was a book publisher, but he was a great pianist, and he loved Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff, and I grew up with that sound in my ears. And so I decided, let's do something Russian. So I looked for, War and Peace. No, I'm not going to do Anna Karenina, that she falls under the train. I'm going to do something that has, although one doesn't think of it, has a wonderful, exciting end. And that's Dr. Zhivago, because Dr. Zhivago wrote poetry, and he was madly in love with this woman, whose name was Olga Ivinskaya, but in the book, and this is Lara, she's not Olga. He is able to write poetry that transcends the horrible time that they were living in, which is the revolution. And it's the love and the art that transcends all of the chaos of the war and continues on after his death, and will continue on into the future. And that's what lives on, is the love and the art. And that's what appealed to me so much, is that after Yurii Zhivago dies, his poetry remains and is known and recited by everybody. He was one of the most important poets of the 20th century. So that's why I wanted to do it, because it's art and love surviving chaos and war. And that's what our show is pretty much about.
So Des, when did you get involved in this project? Where was it in its development at the point you joined it?
Lucy called me. I'm not going to say the exact date. Pasternak completed the novel in 1955, and this was several weeks later. Lucy called and said, would you put a team together with me with the idea of developing Dr. Zhivago into a musical. And it sounded like a completely mad idea to me, but I knew the novel, and I had spent some time in Russia right before the changes. I took a number of trips there. So there were a number of things that appealed to me. I'd also worked on the Tim Rice musical, with the ABBA twins, Chess, which involved the Soviet Union. I directed Lee Blessing's play A Walk in the Woods, which of course was about nuclear arms control. And also I love the Russian writers and the Russian composers. I think I've either directed or produced all of the major Chekhov plays. So I was insane enough to join hands with Lucy, and we put a team together. And I think we were 3 years on the project before a word was written or a note was composed, just structuring it and trying to figure out how to not just condense the novel, but structure it so that it would be as, as satisfying as the story is.
Well, also finding the essence of the things, because it's such a huge novel, so that you don't want to reduce it. You want to just find the essence of it. And I call Des because there are very few directors in the world that can take this entire thing on. I mean, it's a huge project, and I think we were very brave to do it. It was a big challenge, and some people really love it, which is wonderful. It's really exciting. And when these great performers do this show, and the audience just spontaneously rises and cheers and applauds for 5 minutes until we shove them out of the auditorium. It is a thrill, and it's just so hard to do this, and you get a lot of bumps along the way, and I'm sure you all know that we've had a lot of bumps, but to really hear this fabulous work and to appreciate what we have done is a great thrill. And thank you so much, Tam and Kelli, for presenting it so wonderfully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I understand it, the first staged performances, beyond any workshops or anything, was 2007 at the La Jolla Playhouse?
I believe it was either 2007 or 6. We did a workshop, a full workshop, fully staged, and then we followed it with a full production. And we've been to Australia to do it, and believe it or not, we went to South Korea to do it and we did it in Korean, in Seoul. And so we've been working on it for a very long time. We've done 3 readings. And I'm struck by what you had to say to begin with, because I think that's very perceptive, The epic love story on stage, I think it's something that probably falls in and out of fashion. I don't think it started with Chess and Les Mis and Phantom, and you can find these stories going back. Interestingly enough, Les Mis was a huge hit as a play in the 20s. But I think right now, and I'm sure there are all kinds of reasons for this, but it does take a bit of courage to do an epic historical love story that isn't riddled with irony. I think we live in the age of parody, and I think there is a resistance to the epic love story, and it may have everything to do with the times we're going through. As it turns out, I can't imagine a more pertinent story than this, although when we started, as you said, it was during a kind of thaw in Russia, and there was a great deal of hope, some of which has been lost now. But I do, the strange thing is it's a hard story. You can't really bring irony to this story. It takes place largely between 1914 and 1921, which is Russia mobilizing for World War I, the 2 revolutions of 1917, one of the bloodiest civil wars in history, which followed that. And so irony is not necessarily called for as one of the courses in this movie.
Nor comedy.
Yeah, nor comedy. But it is, I believe, a story that really sings. And it is a story that I think really reaches people emotionally. It's ultimately about love and art transcending the most difficult times, the unimaginable times. And I think that's a theme that sadly enough is truly universal.
I'm curious, Kelli and Tam, did you know the story before you auditioned for the show? And was there a temptation to watch the movie?
I knew of the novel. I had done some workshops of another Russian musical, and so in studying the history of it, I had come across the novel and had discovered in the research how important the novel was, what it actually did for the country as a whole. And so it was on my top 20 books I need to read in my life. And it wasn't more than 6 months later, oh, it's time to read it now because you're going to play the role. So Felt very serendipitous. And I was tempted to watch the film, so I did. Because when I got the audition, I had, I think it was 4 days to prep for the first audition. And the novel, it would be hard to read it in 4 days. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to get some kind of source material here. Normally I don't like to do that kind of thing, but I knew I'd never be Julie Christie anyway, so why not? And I watched the film, which I did find to be helpful, at least in giving me a bit of the backstory and kind of touching on what these people were going through and the climate of the country at the time. So I did watch the film.
I just want.
Yeah, I watched the I did watch the parts of the miniseries later because I was just curious after that was after we'd already begun to see.
There was a 2002 miniseries with Keira Knightley and Sam Neill.
It was really good, and I just, when you get into it and you're like, I know how we're doing it. How could anyone else possibly tackle this? It was just morbid curiosity to see what they would have done with it in a miniseries, and it was quite good.
I want to say something about your audition because that, it was so important to get a Lara who could really convey this character. But for me as a composer, what I do is I try to translate an emotion when I'm writing a song. That's what I care about. I have to get it emotionally across. And when Kelli came and did her audition, I thought she understood this completely. I mean, I just felt the emotion of what I had written coming out so wonderfully. So thank you, Kelli.
It was easy to do. The scores, it's all there. You just have to do what it's telling you to do. It's all you, Lucy.
Listen, because you were talking about audition, the same with Tam. I mean, it just, for actors to be able to create what the composer means is just so important to me, and I so thank my wonderful actors.
We are very lucky though, because there aren't many writers who sort of give you that chance to be that emotionally free. And in terms of writing wonderful ballads, then I'm sitting next to probably the queen of all of them, to be honest. It's very easy to do because the journey's through the music, and you literally then you add the lyrics, and you just literally it's all done for you. So it's very easy to do with such wonderful music. So we're very grateful.
Now we should acknowledge the other collaborators who aren't on the stage with us tonight, but the book by Michael Weller and the lyrics by Michael Corey and Amy Powers. But now, Des, I want to ask you, when you were with it from the beginning, Lucy said you helped assemble the team. How did you manage a group of writers starting with the project, as opposed to people who came to you with something that you could respond to immediately?
The very strange thing, which you well know about doing musicals, is there's no recipe. You go through a process, and you expect it to apply to the next musical, and of course it never does. So you start with a how-to book or a rock and roll album or a great novel by a great Russian poet. It's always a different journey completely, and which is terrifying. In this particular case, we realized that one of the rules of doing a musical is that you can only do a job once. There's simply no time to do it twice. So Lucy can make it rain, I can make the bus pull up, etc. The book writer can do something else, can start the love story. And so it was critically important when we set off this vast journey through time and space across the Russian steppes, following these 5 central characters, that we structure it really carefully. There's always a danger then that the writing will be kind of stillborn because you've worked it out in advance. On the other hand, there was simply no choice. So we could assign tasks to each other. Essentially, we spent, 3 years telling the story to each other back and forth. And this collaboration comes out of it, which is, which it sounds like anarchy, and sometimes it is anarchy. But I think your job as the director is to be a kind of an aesthetic field marshal, as a friend of mine once said. And your job is really to get the best work out of the very talented people you're working with, and that includes the writers. Sondheim's, I think, definition of collaborate is I collaborate you and you collaborate me. But they were such inspiring people, and I think we became very fond of each other, and we had, of course, many heated discussions about how to do this, but I can't imagine not going through that process on this particular piece. I don't think it would always work, but I think it was necessary for us to all get in the sandbox together and build and tear down our sandcastles.
And I also have to say that, you know, it was a real collaboration, because Des was part of the collaboration. It wasn't a situation where we would go off as writers and write stuff and then give it to Des. Des was in the room with us, sort of deciding and helping us mold and creating this work, because it's a huge work, you know, and it just requires that we have that we pay, you know, total respect and homage to Pasternak, but yet make this livable and make it audience friendly. As you know, it's just so important. And you know, the audience really had the sense of the love story in their, you know, in their minds, and they want that. They want to experience that. And so we had to really find the balance between war and love, because it is about both things. It's, you know, war and peace. But finding the balance has been very tricky.
So as collaborative as it is, and as much as you were all in it together from the beginning, is there something you all sort of loved but had to let go as the show proceeded? Was there a moment, a song, a plot point that had to go away?
Des is looking at me, so this one is for you, Lucy. Of course. I mean, I think we you know, we must have written 75, 80 songs during the course of, and some I loved more than others, and some I was, oh, thank God we don't have to do that. Sorry.
You know, it was interesting. You have to make some tough decisions, and if you read the novel, there is a very strong core to this novel that involves these 5 characters, and the novel's actually been criticized because of this device of coincidence, and I happen to believe that coincidence plays a fairly major part, you know, component in one's life, and it's actually a way of, I think, sorting things out and organizing things, you know, looking at coincidence. But it does, if it were a river, there are many tributaries that get explored. And so we had to make decisions about that. We knew we had, it's 5 characters, 3 men in love with 1 woman, and 2 women in love with 1 man. And that's at the core of this as we travel across, you know, a time, as you know, between 1917 and 1953, V.I. Lenin and Joe Stalin murdered between 50 and 60 million people, were responsible for their deaths. So we had these 2 things going on. We had to give things up. And one of the great breakthroughs was realizing that we couldn't spend the equivalent of a couple 100 pages on the train between Moscow and Yuri. And of course, David Lean got great, forgive the pun, but mileage out of this in the motion picture. And that those are very famous sequences. Trains are a major metaphor and image in the novel and in the film and also on stage. So we made the decision of ending the first act with the family leaving Moscow. And the second act essentially arrives with them arriving in Yuri. And that was a difficult, you know, decision to make, and absolutely painful, because there are some beautiful sequences on that train.
I'm curious also about the look of the show. For those who haven't seen it yet, I hope you'll agree with my reductive characterization, but Act 1 has sort of a frame on it that shifts from scene to scene, but it's very much defined, and it looks like a grand old Russian palace, perhaps. In the second act, when you're no longer in Moscow, there's a very different frame. How much were you trying, did you initially try to be representative at all with the show and shift to that? How did the look come about?
You know, just very briefly, the idea came from this same notion of 5 characters. And Michael Scott Mitchell, who's an Australian designer, we developed this idea that you could do the whole play in one room. And with actors like these, that would be, of course, a great privilege. And they don't need a lot of help. You could do it in one room. And so out of that discussion came this notion of using the Grameco ballroom, the family ballroom in Moscow, and simply having it deteriorate, blow it up, use it for interiors, exteriors, walls come and go, windows get smashed. We recycle chairs over and over, and chairs become a central image. And so even the second act is actually just the framework of that ballroom. And so essentially you go through decades and across these again, vast distances, and you never leave that one room. So it takes on, hopefully, a kind of metaphorical power, and I think it does describe what happened during the disaster that followed the revolution and the disintegration.
Also, here's one of those serendipitous, occasions, is that our set designer had just come back from the Hermitage in St. Petersburg and was so affected by that floor that became for him a central image, and we just were dazzled by that as a concept.
You all know the Hermitage was the winter palace of the Tsar once upon a time, now a great art museum. There was a very beautiful photo spread of Kelli and Tam and your co-stars in your costumes, but in a different setting. I'm just wondering, it's a common question, I'm afraid, but did putting on those costumes affect how you perceived your characters? Because looking at them up close in those photos, they seem so luxurious.
Yeah, yeah, obviously they do. I mean, they flew us to Siberia to actually do it. So that was.
I think it was Westchester, wasn't it?
No, that was quite.
Yonkers!
Yeah.
Same thing.
No, we went to Yonkers. We had this wonderful day where we went to Yonkers, and in this, it was like a mansion, wasn't it? And there was like wonderful, like open space and fields, and that's at this time when we did it. It was. New York was just covered in snow, which is wonderful.
The coldest day
It was
of the year.
But it looked absolutely, it was so picturesque, it was beautiful, it was perfect. It couldn't have been any more perfect, except it could have been warmer. So we set up all these wonderful shots. There was some of me outside, traipsing through the snow, turning blue. But no, obviously the costumes, then when you put all those layers on, you can't help but feel sort of Russian. You put the furs and, you kind of then inhabit it. It sort of becomes part of you, which is, it's great. And Paul Tazwell, the designer on this show, he's outdone himself, I think. The costumes are just stunning. They're lovely to wear. They're hot, I'm not going to lie. Now the weather's changing. Now we want the snow, don't we? But they look the part, and they actually feel the part as well, and they kind of help you sort of. I always say when I'm kind of performing, I don't feel properly the character until I actually put on my boots or my shoes, because I think that just enables you to walk differently. You kind of find. I honestly do think you find your character through that. And especially with things like suits and the way they would just affect the way you stand, even the way you talk suddenly changes, even when you put all these wonderful things on. So we're very lucky to have such wonderful costumes and designers and these guys.
I would agree with all of that. What's awesome about the costumes and different for me in other experiences is that there's really no tricks to them. It's not, it's a collar sewn in, but it's actually just nothing underneath, or it's a shell. It's all fully lined in wool and fur and mink. So you're not wearing a costume, you're wearing what they would have worn in its entirety. So it does affect you. I'm in a corset for Act 1, but I don't wear it in Act 2 because the time period switch, they stopped wearing corsets. So we've tried to stay very true to the time period and to the climate, obviously. And then for me, I get to be blonde, and I put in my blue contacts. So I'm completely transforming, which absolutely affects me, because when I look in the mirror, I don't see myself, I see someone else. And her hair's very long, and It's an interesting thing, and it's very powerful as an actor to change. Because once you look in the mirror and you see someone else, then you dare to do some things that are outside of yourself that you know would be more in tune with the character. And through that kind of trial and error process, I find who Lara is. What was it like to be, the only blonde person on stage? And when people look at you, why they look at you. I remember being in Japan in 2000, and we had a girl in our performance troupe who was platinum blonde. And they used to come up to her and touch her on the street. Random Japanese strangers on their way to work because of what the blonde hair meant. And I'm not saying that I was the only blonde in Russia, but I'm the only blonde on our stage, and it does affect the way you feel when you walk into a room and you know that everyone's looking at you because you're, this shining white top of your head kind of thing. And I'm also the only person in blue. And so it does affect me. It affects how I feel when I come onto the stage. So.
And these decisions, I think, are important in terms of storytelling. Again, in a musical, you have so few opportunities. You're trying to tell a vast story in about 2 hours and 15 minutes of stage time. So you look for those opportunities. Kelly's right; she's the only blonde that we see on stage, and so when she walks on, your eye goes there. And that helps us focus the story. We also have this color, blue dye was very valuable in the, through the 19th century. And so, when you have a whole color range on stage and you have blue in just one area, one place, your eye will go to the blue. So of course, Lara's the only one who gets to use a Guishar blue. We use this color over and over again. So the designers on a musical are storytellers as well, and it's important that we have them flexing their muscles to help focus the story.
It's fun as well. Everyone grows up, and I defy anyone to sit here and tell me that they haven't tried costumes on in their time as they're growing up, or put on a little princess dress or something like that.
Or so, maybe this very weekend.
Oh, maybe, and just now you're all wearing, yeah. But it's great fun to put all this sort of stuff on as well. It's what makes it magical. To try on these different costumes and experiment with things. And I have all these. We went through a process of me having. I have wigs in the show, and wigs. Everyone has wigs, but I have wigs as well. But then went through this process of trying beards as well, and I think at one point I got called a Neanderthal. So that kind of.
You look like Hagrid.
I came into rehearsal and there was this guy with this really looking like one of those commercials that you see of these Neanderthal men.
Captain Caveman, I think the word is.
I said, who is that?
Yeah, it was me underneath all of it. But and gradually through the process of people complaining,
Some people thought he looked like Cat Stevens too, which was okay.
Especially when I brought the guitar out. It was gradually we got a process of elimination as well. So you go through all these processes, and eventually you kind of find the right look. Hopefully, we do.
Lucy, I want to ask about the actual composing work. How much were you thinking as you worked on the songs about making them sound Russian? Was there a conscious effort to do that? Was that something that maybe came up later in terms of the arrangements and orchestrations? Or were you not really bound by period as you were thinking of them?
I wasn't bound by period, but I certainly was bound with a flavor of Russian music. I don't think it makes sense for an American composer to try to imitate Russian music. So I wanted the Russian quality to come through me. So I listened a great deal to Shostakovich, Prokofiev, all of the great Russian composers. I listened to folk music. Our household became a Russian sound screen, and so it was something I was very much aware of in writing it. But in the orchestrations, of course, we with Danny Trube and with the arranger Eric Stern and Ron Melrose, we very much were conscious of trying to get Russian harmonies and the balalaika sound and all of those things. We were very concerned about doing, and also keeping sort of a variety of styles. You know, I as a composer, I don't want everything to sound the same. So we sort of went from a Russian folk thing to a Russian sort of opera style thing to just things that we needed to tell in terms of storytelling. And once you understand that that's the role that you are doing as composer and lyricist, you find a way to tell that, and you need your variety, and you need to answer a lot of needs of the show and the voices. You know, I mean, we had to find in doing rehearsals, there were some times we had to say, okay, well, we have to change the tone, we have to change the harmony because it doesn't suit these gorgeous voices, so we find a way to do that. But it always has to have a Russian flavor. It can't be sort of American pop.
But I think one of the things that makes you kind of akin to the Russian composers has very little to do with instrumentation. You know, and I think that's a little bit of a prejudice about Russian music. Oh, we've got to have balalaika if it's Russian. You know, Tchaikovsky and Rimsky-Korsakov and Borodin, and these are some of, in my opinion, the great melodists.
Absolutely.
In classical.
Well, for me, melody
and you
is.
are a great melodist.
Thank you, my darling.
And that's what links you to the Russian composer.
Well, that's what I like to do. I like
There-
to play melody. And
there-
as a writer, my main instrument is voice. So voice communicates, and that's the melody part. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. There is one melody in the show that is not by Lucy Simon. And I'm curious as to when and how the decision was made to include the music known through the movie as Lara's theme.
Why don't you?
You know, we had great resistance toward this particular melody, and not to name drop, but I'm friends with the actor Christopher Plummer. We've done several plays together. I had the honor of directing him as Prospero a few years ago, and in Caesar and Cleopatra, and we've become good buddies. And when I brought up the fact that I was doing Doctor Zhivago, he said to me, "You're not going to use that dreadful song. You're not going to use that song they played over and over and over again." And you know, but the song is, of course, Lara's theme has become associated with Doctor Zhivago very closely, and we resisted it for a very long time. We didn't want to put it in. And then finally, relatively late in the game, I would say within the last year or so, is that right? An idea occurred. And I think we had come to the point where we felt like homage to the David Lean film, to that original composition was a good thing to do, as long as it didn't interfere with, you know, the score that Lucy composed. And we found this place. I think it's an unobvious place. It's sung by nurses. They don't actually sing it, Lara and Yuri. The women learn that they're going home. It's, again, right after the October Revolution, when the Bolsheviks decided to withdraw from World War I. And so they're going home, and they're incredibly moved. They can't believe that the war is over. They've completely lost hope. It's inconceivable to them that they're going home. And we treat it as if it's a folk song. And it's not, it doesn't advance the plot, it doesn't, but emotionally, it has, I think, a place in the show. And Lucy, this was really, she was the main proponent of doing this, and I was probably,
We would fight
I was
about
resistant.
this. I would say, you know, listen, the audience wants to hear this song. But I think what was really important to Des and to me and to the other creators is to make it integral with the play, not to just say, okay, now we're going to do Somewhere My Love, but to have it at that moment that the people who've been on the front for all of these years learn they're going home, and they want to sing something that is dear to their hearts from home. And so, I mean, it would have been Moscow Nights or some other song that was popular, and it was just wonderful to say, okay, this is what they're going to sing. This is a song that they would know, although not this contemporary group. But I mean, this is a song that they would sing, being happy to go home. So.
And they get to dance.
Oh yeah, very nice.
And it is a moment, a very important moment emotionally for them, and it's a scene in which I think they're really actually quite fabulous. And although there are no words spoken about their love, it's all counterpoint, and it's all visual. And perhaps in the hands of lesser actors, we wouldn't have this. But I dare say people are very, very moved by this. I also think that Danny Trub and Lucy have folded this song into the score. If you didn't know, if you just landed on the planet and you were coming to Dr. Zhivago, I don't think you would know that it was composed by a different composer.
Yeah.
I think it is part of the fabric of the show.
It feels quite integral, yeah.
There it is now.
Oh, hello.
Yes.
Is it Nina Rota? Who wrote that?
It was
Maurice Jarre.
Maurice Jarre,
Yeah.
the French composer, who also did The Man Who Would Be King, which I actually just looked at Chris Plummer's film, and Chris
Yeah.
didn't like that score very much either.
We could do a sidebar on what Chris Plummer doesn't like, maybe after. I started talking about things that you might have had to get rid of, given the abundance of material in the novel. I'm wondering, in terms of structuring the show, was there anything you had to create that wasn't there in order to achieve?
Yes, a very important scene to us. It was just sort of mentioned in the novel that Tonya and Lara, that Lara helps Tonya deliver her child. So we know that there's something that happened between these two women, but we needed to create a time when the two of them would come face to face. So we created a time in the show. When you tell this, because Des was really instrumental in finding where we would do this.
In terms of the library?
In terms of the library scene, right?
Yeah. Basically, there is I think quite a lovely scene where Tonya is trying to find out what's happened to Yuri, and there's a character who's kind of a tertiary character named Yelenka. One of the things about, of course, the Soviet totalitarianism is it was very heavily dependent on spying. So you'd sometimes have spies operating within a family. You'd be spying on family members. And so she has gone to Tonya and told Tonya about the relationship between Yuri and Lara. Lara's volunteering in the library, and Tonya comes to see her. And they have a reaction that's, I guess, surprising. Rather than, the focus of the scene is they're both really worried about him. And they discover that they actually like each other. And in the novel, of course, this relationship gets quite developed. They actually become very close. And it is a sort of a surprising, and it is an invention, but I think it parallels something that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, Des and Michael Weller just loved the idea of the mistress and the wife coming together. That was really what they wanted to find. That's a great love song.
This is every man's fantasy, of course, that they would actually make it about the man, I'm sure.
But it's also a song, that it comes as no surprise, that affects everybody. I mean, everybody connects to that song and loves it, and it's one of our.
I think that your question is a good question too. I think you have to free yourselves. The team has to be free to invent as well. And I think it's often about being faithful to something, faithful to a story, faithful to the themes, without being obedient. And I think that's what frees our imaginations when we're able to, and we spend a lot of time discussing this. Kelli has practically memorized the novel and is very, very valuable that way, because she often reminds me of something that comes from the novel, that shapes her performance or allows me into that sort of personal part of the process. On the other hand, I think she would agree too that we have to find our own way, and at the end of the day, we're singing this story, and we have to find our own rules and principles and ultimately be faithful to them.
As you may have noticed, I was subtly handed a few cards which represent some questions from you all out there. First to Tam and Kelli, is this show the most vocally demanding show you've ever done?
For me personally, I'd say yes. I think I sing 852 songs in this show, and 40 of those are reprises as well. Yeah, it is. I wouldn't. I felt very lucky to sing it all, but I mean, obviously, every now and again, you kind of think, "Oh my God, my vocal folds are going to fall out of my throat." But it's. But no, I think for me personally, yes, definitely. Et tu?
No, it's not. Just because I've done a bunch of rock musicals, and I just find rock music 8 times a week to just be more difficult because it's not what the voice naturally wants to do a lot. That's why rock stars have a concert and then they don't for a while and then they have another one. So it's not as vocally challenging. The challenging part about it is the emotional journey with the vocals, and it took a while, and I think for both of us to kind of navigate that. How do I still sound pretty and look ugly while crying, or or letting whatever the emotion is of the moment come through and still be able to keep the instrument free, the body and the voice. So, but that's been thrilling for me to find, and I'm still finding it every day as the emotional journey changes from performance to performance. So yeah, but I feel lucky to do it, and I love singing this music. It's so easy to sing because she writes these melodies that the voice wants to sing. The voice wants to go where the melody is going. It's hard to describe if you're not a singer or if you've never been blessed enough to have a score like this, but it all makes sense. It just makes sense. Whereas I've sung other scores and I'm like, oh, and now we're doing this. And it's awful, And she just doesn't write that way. She writes the way you want to sing it, the way you want to tell the story. So,
I would also say that obviously it's all. I'll reiterate what Kelli said. It's a beautiful score to sing. Vocally, it kind of goes where you want it to go. You don't have any of these jumps. But the trick for what we do is doing the 8 shows a week. That's where it gets really tiring, and especially with all the scenes and all the emotions that go in it. So that's where I would say that it's most challenging. Everyone can do 1 or 2 shows a week, but we're not. We've got to then do it another 6, 7, 8, and that's where it becomes quite tiring and difficult.
And
They are real actors. So, they are genuine actors. If we were doing, I would love to do Rosalind or Henry V, or, and so I think that point about going on a very rather complex emotional journey is important when you're talking about the songs. They don't separate those 2 things. And, I think Yurii Zhivago is a kind of a Hamlet character. He is, he's a man who's torn apart. He has the point of view of the other. He can see both the aristocracy and the communists. He has the point of view of the artist. It is not an easy journey, and they are true athletes, artistic athletes. I think that places a burden on top of the singing. They're playing classical roles at the same time that they're singing these parts.
And we should acknowledge that Kelli and Tam are at the end of an 8-performance week. They did a matinee today, and when we finish here, they finally get to start their time off.
I was like, do we have to do another one?
No, you get one more song. I'm going to read one question. I'm going to say up front, we will not ask for this question to be answered because it would be revealing stage secrets, but I just love both the question and the way it's written. So I just want you to acknowledge that we do have this. The question is, in the scene where the young rebel over-imbibes, how did you effectuate the vomitus coming out of the man's mouth? We're going to move right on from that.
I'll hang out at the fourth day.
For Lucy, and I think this is going to be our last question before we go to one final song. Lucy, what inspires you most when composing?
Tam Mutu.
I don't know. It depends upon what I'm composing, and I really always go for character. I want to translate that character's person into a melody. So that's, I guess, what inspires me, is knowing something about that character. And there's some songs that I will write a melody for even before I know what it is, and then I try to figure out what that is. Now, the last song that we're going to do, so this is a good segue into it, that was the first melody that I sat down and wrote for Doctor Zhivago. And I sort of labeled it on my tape recorder, this is the Love Rhapsody. And I sang both parts. I sang the male part and the female part. I had no idea what it was going to end up as, what the lyric would be, where it would go in the show. But I knew that this was the right feel for these lovers.